Let's talk about quarterback battles around the country right now. We got a lot of them, and these are big programs too. The Texas quarterback situation is really interesting because that's where a new staff is. You got Steve Sarkisian, you got his staff coming in there, and so you watched Casey Thompson in the bowl game, and this is well documented by this point. We don't need to go in reverse, but you watched him and you said, okay, that's definitely the guy. But then the new staff comes in, and you have to wonder, well, are they going to see what I saw? Well, then we go into the spring game and the entirety of spring, and you see Hudson Card and you see Casey Thompson, and you wonder, are we going to exit spring with the same pecking order? And I think we did, but I don't know that watching the spring game alone really proved any of that to anyone, which is probably a good thing for Sarkisian. So he can keep his quarterback dynamic and he can keep whatever he wants, but barring injury, like right now, I'd be willing to bet pretty sizable amounts of money, if you force me to, that Casey Thompson is going to be the starting quarterback there. But we have enough of a valid quarterback competition that it certainly bears watching. And then you also wonder this. We don't really have a great way to know whether Hudson Card's a guy in the perfect system at the perfect time that may have some quantum leap over summer workouts and going into fall. Who knows what happens? Those quarterbacks, man, when they get in the summer, some of them go to their own private coaches, their own private psychiatrists. That happens a lot, not just sports psychiatrists either. And so that stuff happens a lot. You never know. When a guy's 38 years old and you say goodbye to him in April and you see him again in August, he's still the same guy. But when a guy's 17 or 18 or 19 years old, they could be totally different people by the time you see him again in August. So that one bears watching, the Texas quarterback situation. I like Casey Thompson right now. Don't think Hudson Card's out of that thing. At Ohio State, this is, if not for Oklahoma, the best quarterback situation in America right now. C.J. Stroud is the favorite to win that job. I think most people close to the program believe that. But here's what else they believe that maybe you do or don't know. They've got two other guys that if C.J. Stroud were to just say, you know what, I don't like football anymore, deuces, they would be totally fine with Jack Miller. They would be totally fine with Kyle McCord. That is what you call depth at the quarterback situation. It's not guys they feel comfortable about 2 years down the road. It's guys they feel like they could win with this year. I don't know if all of them are going to be on campus this fall, but what I'm saying is C.J. Stroud is a guy that I think doesn't have that job locked down. I think he's got the inside track on that job. To me, the subplot here is, are all those guys staying on campus? I know that gets old, and we don't even like talking about it a lot on the show here, but as I said about Ohio State, normally it's just who's going to start. But with them, there are two intriguing parts. One is who's going to start. I think it'll be C.J. Stroud. But then the second part is, as I told you before, I think someone else, some other program out there's best shot at winning a title down the road could be on Ohio State's roster. Just like Joe Burrow. Once upon a time was a Buckeye, went to LSU. The rest is history. Who knows where Jack Miller, for example, could end up. Texas A&M, Haynes King, Zach Calzada. If you watched the A&M spring game, it was probably eye-opening in that it didn't look like the gap was nearly as big to maybe the naked eye as we had been led to believe through practice reports and through whispers and intel between King and Calzada. Now, I still think that there is a gap. I don't know how large the gap is, but I still think there's a gap. I still think Haynes King is the guy with, if you want to call it the inside track, probably the guy with the inside track here. But here's what I wonder. Kind of the same deal. It's like you would think if a guy has a sizable lead, when he's put in a competitive environment, it would show. And I don't know if it totally showed in the spring game. And it's hard to get that pick six down in the red zone out of your mind. I know it's one play. I know, for instance, Zach Calzada may have done that 5 times, for all I know, in the practice leading up to the scrimmage. That's not reality. I'm just saying, for argument's sake, he could have. This is a good, healthy quarterback competition, too. Jimbo, when he's coming out of spring ball, some people thought this was window dressing, but I thought it was valid. When he said, I'm not worried about quarterback. Everyone kept asking him about quarterback. He said, I'm not worried about quarterback. Y'all want to talk about that? I'm fine with quarterback. I feel good about where we are right there. Translation, I think he believes he can win with either one of them. If, and then he continued, we get offensive line figured out. Offensive tackle, more specifically. And there's some concern around there that even as much as they could do in the offseason in terms of progressing and developing and whatnot, gelling, coalescing, they got a lot to replace, so it's to be expected. It's shaky in the spring. Some of the concern around there is the ceiling at offensive tackle is maybe a little bit lower than they want it to be because they don't think they're quite athletic enough at tackle, which is a problem when you face the kind of edge rushers that you're going to face in the SEC and beyond if you want to make a run in the playoff. So that doesn't I don't know, maybe it does tie into the quarterback battle, but quarterback and wide receiver, offensive tackle, those are things where there is a thin line that could separate A&M from being 9-3 versus being a playoff contender, and that's maybe even if they lose to Bama. That's a team that could be good enough to where they could lose a competitive game to Alabama. If they lose a game 34-27 to Alabama, A&M's right there in the playoff conversation rest of the year. How about Florida State? I don't know about playoff this year for Florida State, but I do know this is one. They wrapped up their spring a couple of weeks ago, so we haven't really spoken about them a lot since then. But when Mackenzie Milton came in there, to refresh everyone's memory, looked at that situation, we had no clue. And maybe to some degree we still don't. We got a lot better idea, but we didn't have any clue what his knee was going to look like. Had surgery complications. It was already a terrible injury. Had surgery complications, had to get other surgeries. So all I asked for was, can we just see him run? So he ran in the spring game. Looked good. A lot better than I thought he'd look, to be honest with you. Had that Steve Austin knee brace on, but he looked okay. If that's the case, I said before the spring game, if that's the case, I think he's going to win the job. Because what I'm thinking is, if he's already at that point in the spring game, then we've got the rest of April, May, June, July, and then we open camp in August. I mean, that's 3 or 4 months down the road that you get to further rehabilitate the knee structurally. You get to mentally rehabilitate yourself to where you're where you need to be between the years. And he hasn't lost arm talent. He hasn't lost the acumen. None of that's been lost. And I think Travis Hunter's job there, his role, if you've got him penciled into that starting role, I think it's very vulnerable. I think Mackenzie Milton's going to be their starting quarterback. There's still some split opinion down there, but I think Mackenzie Milton's ultimately going to be the guy. And listen, if he's not, then that means Hunter beat him out, which in and of itself is a good sign for Florida State. LSU is where the most intriguing quarterback room is to me, because I'm not quite sure what to make of it. I think they got one of the best quarterback rooms in the country, but that doesn't mean that there is one elite candidate in there. It could be that there's two. It could be that there's none. Right now, I think this thing's open. I believe that coaching staff went into spring, Ed Orgeron namely, went into spring and thought Miles Brennan will take control of this job. And I don't think he did. And I don't think it's Miles Brennan's fault. I just think Max Johnson's that much of a gamer. Max Johnson is one of those guys, if you didn't already know it before watching him play Florida, you certainly knew it afterwards. He's one of those guys that does not just blow you away with his measurables or blow you away with all of his physical traits. I'm not saying he's poor in any of those areas. I'm also not telling you he's going to test off the charts in any of those areas. But what I think he's got is that intangible stuff. If you were to try and define quarterback moxie, let's say, never been crazy about the word, but quarterback moxie, if you define that, if you quantified it, he'd have it. And I'm not saying Brennan doesn't. I'm saying Max Johnson does. I know it. And so that's kind of like trying to nail the old Jell-O to the wall, to try and beat him out. So Miles Brennan's putting forth a really good effort down there. I just think it's hard to pull Max Johnson off the field. And it makes it really tough, in a good way. It makes it really tough on that coaching staff, because eventually what's going to happen is they're going to get in fall camp, and they're going to get down to 2 weeks to go into Louisiana. And even if they're not going to announce it publicly, they're going to have to make some decisions on who's going to start at quarterback. Because they start with, well, I got Texas's schedule in my mind for LSU. So LSU, I don't have their schedule in my mind off the top of my head. I think I got the helmet grid schedule here. But whoever they play, yeah, I got way too many windows open, Colin. What a shame. So whoever they play, they got to make a decision to me eventually. And what I think right now is in the mind of a lot of those, that's right, they go to UCLA. Yeah, so they got to make a trip way out west. Thank you, Director Emeritus Colin. They got to decide who's going to start there. And it may be, maybe it'll be one of those situations where they go into the season and they say, we're going to play both of them. But even then, one of them's going to start. Like, one of them's going to take the field first. When they get to that conversation, whenever it is, it's going to be probably assumed by some people on that staff in June, July, opening camp in August. They're just going to think to themselves, maybe, oh, eventually it'll be Miles. But that moment never comes. That click moment, that moment of clarity never comes. And that's a tough decision to make. And you got a new offensive staff down there. You got a head coach trying to overturn things. That'll be interesting to watch. All right, that's the quarterback battle update. We'll certainly be talking about that a lot more over the summer. It's a good thing, though, because, you know, we didn't even bring up Clemson, but it's not because they are untested at quarterbacks, just because they don't have a competition there, per se. It's DJ's job. At Alabama, Bryce Young, new quarterback, new starter. It's just his job. So there's a lot of overturn. There's a lot of quarterback churn at some major programs. So if you guys are out there and you're looking for parity, maybe that is one of the keys to finding it.